Don't you love it when that happens?
So we are doing the Shape Sphere of Influence Actions and Behavior workshop that's focused on some leadership behaviors that we probably know, but are kind of putting some language to. And glad folks are joining us with Zoom. The toolbar is at the bottom. Rachel is going to be helping me moderate our chat. So if you have any questions, let us know. And we will be using that secondary device or a secondary window on your computer or tablet, and go to menti.com. So menti.com, and then the code is going to be 683525. Menti.com 683525. All right, that will keep popping up if we need folks to be able to get on, but I am gonna start continuing and going on into what we're gonna be learning about today. So I have this quote that I keep coming back to, and actually when I started researching it, I couldn't exactly find who it was attributed to. Some say John Quincy Adams, some say Dolly Parton, some say Nelson Mandela. So that's at the bottom if you're interested. But if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And I think for me, this has always been a quote that I've come back to as being very indicative that it's about that influence, about that inspiration, right? We're in a society and culture of social media and influencers who actually make money influencing people in different ways of from what to do to what to buy, etc. You could argue if that's leadership or not, but I think it's that dream more, that learn more, do more, and become more, that better version of self, of space, that indicates leadership. And so we're going to differentiate a little bit between leader and leadership. I want to tell a little bit of a story, So our focus today are on the actions or the behaviors that we see within leadership, that inspiration or influence, and then talking about kind of complicating the difference between leadership and leaders. So why I want to talk about this, I want to tell you a little story. We all are probably at this point sheltering in place in some form or fashion. We all have received regulations about and suggestions, recommendations of what that means, and having conversations with people close to you about what it means for you, what your boundaries of how far you will go, if you leave, if you stay, if you go to the grocery store 7 times a week versus 1 time a week. We've needed to kind of figure this out for ourselves. And whether or not we know it, we are demonstrating behaviors and actions that influence others, that people are looking to. And so all relationships in our life have this power, push, and pull, right? You can sometimes see different relationships in your life where you're like, wow, I go to them for advice, and what they say would really influence me. And sometimes we come to a place in our family of origin or parents where they have influenced you a lot, but then you start to influence them a lot, either by what you're learning or information or ways that you're conducting yourself. And maybe it's a good give and take. I had to have some pretty hard conversations with my family about what shelter in place meant for me, and it got me thinking about influence. And so what I want you to do is to think of a relationship in your life, just one, that you will kind of continue thinking about through this content, because it's easier when you're learning about content to put it in the circumstance or situation of someone else, right? Or of the applicability of it. So for me, I'm going to think of a teacher that I had in elementary school, and that influence that they had on me, and that I also later on was able to have on them. So it doesn't necessarily only go one way or another, and we'll talk about that in a little. So I want you to think about how, kind of as we go and as we talk about these different things, think about how power to influence, culture, and personality also kind of come into this as we're thinking about these different dimensions, which we'll learn about, and I will come back to those 3 things also. So I'm kind of setting up based on what we'll talk about. So again, this is your opportunity to go to menti.com. Again, the 683525 is that code. We're going to watch a couple minutes of a video, part 1, and then we'll come back to it in a moment.
I'd like to tell you about the sphere of influence. The essence of the sphere of influence is how people influence each other, how they influence results and goals, and how you can do this more consciously. In short, how you can increase your impact. What I want to do now is explain the concept so that the moment you run through a sphere of influence report, you will be able to understand the concept from multiple angles. This way, you will more quickly get a grip on the issue and be able to draw conclusions more swiftly. The concept consists of 2 intersecting axes. At the top of the vertical axis, we have lead, and at the bottom, we have follow. Leading behavior is any behavior where you take an active role. With following behavior, you are less verbally present. You go along with what someone else puts forward, and at the bottom, you are in fact totally silent and docile. On the second and vertical axis, you find relationship on the right and content on the left. On the relationship side, everything is done in the service of mutual relationships. There is an emphasis on shared interests, on people's experiences, and on atmosphere. On the content or task side, you see behavior that is centered around tasks, results, and knowledge. Now, before I explain the 12 influencing styles that make up the sphere of influence, I would like to tell you about the laws that apply to the 2 axes, lead and follow, and relationship and content. What happens when someone displays a lot of leading behavior? This leads to a situation where compliant or following behavior is encouraged. The reverse is also true. The moment that you show that you are very docile, you invite others to display leading behavior. Think of a supervisor who gives a presentation to his or her team, and somewhere in the back of their mind they hear a little voice that says, "Gosh, what a lethargic bunch I have in front of me." Well, this means that the supervisor is too active and should back down, ask a question, and let others do the talking. For the other axis, relationship and content, there is also a key applicable law, but that law is different. Here, relationship-oriented behavior encourages relationship-oriented behavior, and content-oriented behavior calls for content-oriented behavior. So, if you focus on common interests, others are also likely to focus on common interests and shared relationships. But if you storm into a room and immediately overload people with what isn't right and what you think must be done, you instantly lure people into the content side of the sphere, and they are likely to debate you or withdraw from the interaction. Now I will
All right. So for me, that went fast. She shared a lot of information. I'm making some presumptions and using kind of gendered language, but the narrator talked about these 2 different axes. This influence direction between action behaviors, and then the actions that display following behaviors. And I think that that's really interesting to think about in terms of what behaviors we display that encourage participation or not, encourage more quiet following or more participatory events, right? Thinking of a supervisor, maybe the relationship that you're thinking about is a supervisor, and you're thinking about how, well, when we go to staff meetings, they just stand up and talk. We never talk about anything. And so it's very content driven and kind of like just directive, and there's very little of the relationship. And some jobs may require that, and that might work and operate very well. Whereas in other work environments, there might be a high focus on relationship. It might be more participatory. It might encourage multiple people to enact leadership in different ways. And so it's more of a collaborative space, right? So this is how I want you to think a little bit about the relationship that you are traveling through. And now I want you to answer a couple of questions based on that. So again, if there are any questions along the way, you can feel free to come off mute or chat to Rachel and myself, and we will cover them. I can't see my chat bar right now, so I'm really relying on my awesome co, Rachel.
I've got the chat bar.
You're awesome. So considering the relationship you're thinking about, I want you to answer this question. Do you feel like you have more influence over them? They have more influence over you? The influence is 50-50, that it like really kind of shifts and changes. Or it shifts, but if I'm really honest, the influence usually goes only one way, right? That kind of makes sense for folks? Nice, okay. So what I love about Menti is the anonymity sometimes of it, because it allows us to take a really honest look at the difference in relationships. And influence, it has an aspect of power in it, and power can be a really good thing, right? That might indicate trust. That might indicate a wanting advice from a person because they've been demonstrated as a credible person, or have qualities that you really respect about them. So it doesn't have to just be about authority. It can also very much be about a shared or joint relationship, kind of as it goes. Great. I'm seeing from about 8 folks. Got a couple more out there. And again, if you are, you see, I saw Rachel like dart for her phone. Okay, great. So then thinking about the content and relationship factors, when you're thinking about that relationship again, is it more content focused? Like if it's a teacher, they're teaching you something, or it's more like relationship focused, like my therapist has a lot of influence over how I think about things, but it's really relationship focused, right? So I'm seeing some, it depends on the situation, more content and more relationship. Great. I'll give it about 10 more seconds. So when we start to understand the different accesses, and this is how, you know, again, we want to think about kind of the content and the task drivenness of it, the relationship, and it's not either or, right? It's not one or the other. It very much can depend. And again, folks who display leadership actions, and we'll talk kind of about that, and we need to also display follower aspects and follower actions as well. So we'll talk about that next. Nice, thanks. Okay, so we are about, oh, do you have a question, Carly? No, okay, you're just looking at the screen, okay. I want to now look at the second part of the video, because we're gonna learn about each of these areas, and this for me is where it goes a little fast. So don't worry, we'll break them down. But here we go, if I can get this to go away.
Discuss all 12 influencing styles. I will start with the top right quadrant, leading in relationships. The first segment we call Inspire. This includes the behavior that it is necessary to adopt in order to propagate your vision and generate support. So, you inspire enthusiasm and clarify your views on a situation. What you do actively promotes your vision, not so much on a rational level, but more on an emotional level. The second segment is called Coach. Here, you take a helping role. You generate food for thought and assist others in finding solutions. In short, your actions are aimed at moving other people forward. The last style of this quadrant is Connect. You identify the wishes, needs, and interests of the people involved, and you actively seek win-win situations. Emphasizing similarities and checking if everyone is on the same page are at the top of your to-do list. On the opposite side of the spectrum is the influence style Convince. People who apply this style often are clear in their opinion. They are outspoken, and they make use of arguments to reinforce their position. They do their utmost to convince others of their perspective. Then we come to Instruct. The focus here is on what others should do to complete a task. You give detailed instructions to, for example, a new colleague who has little knowledge, instructing them in a meaningful way. The last style of the 6 leading styles is called Direct. Here, the emphasis is on discussing desired results and defining a clear framework. So you make sure that people have a clear sense of direction and that they are familiar with boundaries. Over to the bottom of the model, let's start with oppose. Imagine that someone tells you that this and this are going to happen, and your first reaction is, yes, but have we thought about? In short, you put the brakes on. In this case, you oppose. Although this influencing style has a somewhat negative connotation, it is important that someone occasionally does put on the brakes, because that prevents people from getting ahead of themselves. The next style is clarify. Clarifying is about making things as clear as possible and answering the question, what are we talking about? You actively look for details and you ensure that you have fully understood what is said by others. We continue with the segment follow up. Here you make it known you will carry out tasks. This behavior is necessary for progress. If no one follows up, well, then there is a lot of discussion and exchange of information, but nothing actually lifts off. Okay, the last quadrant focuses on following and relationships. The style at the bottom is called listen. While listening, you use few words. You nod. You keep to the background and you let other people do the talking. The middle style we call adapt. This is a step more active than the previous style. You show that you are willing to meet other people halfway by agreeing to what has been suggested, by adjusting your own plans, and by going along with your conversation partner. We end with the last style on the relationship side, empathize. When adopting this style, you are able to take into account the feelings of others and are committed to influencing their mood in a positive way. You show an understanding of and interest in others, and you show your appreciation for the positive qualities and capabilities of those around you. To sum up, the sphere of influence model consists of 12 influencing styles that are determined by two axes: lead and follow, and content and relationship.
So what I really appreciate about the video is we do these things all the time. We involve and are engaged in these types of behavior categories all the time. And so to put it in a framework where we can start to ask ourselves the question of, oh, like I know for me, I wasn't a really good listener until the relationship with my sister, and she told me how important it was when I could listen to her stories and she could feel heard and all of that. And so we can absolutely build these different skills and behavior areas, but to be able to know kind of where our strengths are first and ask ourselves those questions is helpful. It goes along with, I think about the oppose quadrant, the oppose area that is so necessary in critical thinking, what Rachel talked about in our real workshop yesterday. And I think about following up, listening, adapting, thinking about that managing up that we talked about last week. That there are many relationships in our life where lots of these happen all the time. And in many of my friendships, I see a lot of these behaviors as well. And I definitely want to believe I have influence on my friends and they have influence on me, right? So in thinking about these different areas, I want you to think about that relationship. Go back to the relationship that you've kind of been working through, whether it be your supervisory, a family member, family of origin, a friend, a teacher, and which categories do you see in yours? And this could be that have been demonstrated by you or demonstrated by them. And you can pick many options. You can pick just a couple. Awesome. I'm seeing inspire, connect, empathize, clarify. Coaching is there, absolutely. I definitely see that. Clarify, so that really good. I have this theory that we aren't taught to ask really good questions or to kind of follow up on, what did you mean by this? And let me make sure I understand. I love that this inspire is coming out strongly as being a really important aspect within this influence. Adapting and listening, seeing that with coaching, empathizing, and clarifying being high up there as well. And as you'll see, 7 of you have responded as of now, and we'll keep it open for a little bit. And they're all present in some way or another, right? And it will shift and change depending on the context of the situation or what the circumstance is or what the relationship is too. So now goes a little bit deeper, right? If you said maybe adapt and listen and instruct, why did you choose the ones that you did? And you don't have to give me the whole answer, but maybe a little bit of a sentence or a little bit of, this could be that you trust the person and so you go to them for advice, or that you're seen as someone who can oppose when information that's being presented isn't accurate, something like that. So take a couple seconds, think about why you chose the action categories that you did. Relationship is centered around their guidance, mentor-mentee relationship. It's a complex relationship, both because of the depth of our differences and the duration of our relationship. Both of those matter a lot. And when you have longevity with someone, you can see also a shift and change within the context. Duration, again, the length. We are very close, have a lot of trust and a history. So we see that again, that allows us to be honest and bold. Additionally, our history allows us to know the other well and what choices will work out in the long run. And it's usually task-oriented, that there's a very specific context of that relationship, it sounds like. I believe that when I am working with other people, I like to be able to connect with and empathize with people. It makes it easier to talk with people and work with them. So seeing some connection and relationship-oriented action behaviors. Convincing is really important to me, and it goes well with the other categories like listening and empathizing, because how can you expect someone to see things from your point of view if you don't see it from theirs first? What a powerful response. Thanks. Thanks so much. So I want to watch a little clip from The Office. If folks are or aren't familiar, The Office went off the air a couple years ago. It still has so many relevant, usually bad examples of what to do in some different work environments. But I want you to, again, think about the dynamics, think about the action categories, and think about what you see displayed in this exchange with the 4 folks here. So to set this up, there are 2 workers who share an office area. What you're looking at right now is a poster that's hanging up in one of the office areas. And then the supervisor or branch manager and an administrative assistant who works at the front desk. Okay, so folks could argue that was good or bad conflict resolution style, but I definitely saw a few of the aspects that we've been talking about. So on your Mentimeter, and if you're watching, I'd like you to again go back, and you can choose multiple. Which of the behavior categories did you see? Was there any coaching? Was there empathizing? Was there adopting, following up, clarifying, oppose? Take a second to think about it. Yeah. Great. 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 So as we can see, many of the behavior categories were seen. Convincing, definitely high on the list. I think 8 out of 10 of you felt that convincing was somewhere within there. Some listening, more around directing, right? So Michael Scott, who was the branch manager, kind of said at the end, this is what we're doing. We've done enough of this, moving forward, right? Some saw following up, some saw coaching of like, okay, you're only gonna use I statements, and then maybe some empathizing, instructing and opposing, great. Now, from the stance of few behaviors to many behaviors, who displayed the most influencing behavior categories? So like, you just thought about the different ones that you saw, and most of you saw at least a few of them. So did you feel that Oscar, who didn't like the poster, Angela, who did like the poster, Pam, who was involved in the conversation, or Michael displayed the most behavior categories? This is great. All right. So we definitely see, with almost all having responded, that Michael, who was very, it sounded like he initiated the conversation, he brought folks in, he kind of framed it. He did many of the influencing behavior categories, whether that's in the lead or the follow, right? That's, again, the different ways we can think about it. But all demonstrated some aspect of participation in this. And so that's what I want to kind of drive home, is that we're all participative within these different behavior categories in the different circumstances or situations that we find ourselves, right? I really appreciate that many folks felt that Pam had a pretty active role, even though she arguably said the fewest amount of words. What she chose to share, how she interjected, that she was questioning, maybe opposing or offering a different suggestion, was very present and relevant in it. So thanks for taking that opportunity, that little office case study, to see where we see those. So we're gonna try something that we haven't ever tried before. And what I want you to do is, we talked about you, right? You being the individuals, thinking about for yourself these different behavior categories. So what I want you to do is, Rachel's gonna help me put the Google Drive, the Google link into the chat. So I want you to go to the chat and open up, and if I've done it correctly, all of you should be able to edit the document that we're in. So I'm going to go to it now. And so you'll see something like this in front of you. So the idea is to go to an open area, and you can put your name, you can put your initials, you can put a word, just something that kind of claims that as your own. And it looks like there are around 10 folks. I don't know if I counted correctly, but we have plenty of spaces on here. So I want you to go and just claim one, right? And so what that would be is, like, you click on it, and so I might put Emily here, right? So this is the demo. Oh, I'm seeing folks come in. This is great. And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes. And I want you to fill in the percentages in each action area based on how much you utilize or how comfortable you are with that action. So like for me, I shared that listening is still something that I find is really important, but I also don't do it as well as I could. So I might put like 65%, right? Because I think I do it better than average potentially, but I still have a lot of area to work. right? And so I want you to go through and just, you can click on each of these little percentages. And again, the total percentage doesn't have to equal 100. That's the confusing part, right? But just kind of think about if you were to fill this up with a different area, how full would it be? So like coaching, I think I'm in a fair amount of mentoring relationships within my life, both where I am the mentored and the mentee. And so that might be pretty high. Opposing, I could ask more questions when I disagree with something. So that might be for 15%, right? Maybe I need to really think about this. So for you, I want you to fill that in and then take the last 3 or 4 minutes to answer some of these questions. So which actions would you like to work on, right? I might answer with listening. Which actions do you use most frequently? Which actions influenced you the most? Which are most compelling to you? And then how does culture and personality come to impact your actions? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. If anyone's having more issues, go to the chat bar, but I'm going to just put on some music while you all are doing that. And take another minute or two to finish up some of your thoughts. Probably 2 more minutes. All right. So we're going to come back together. And thanks for trying that with us, to have everyone or almost everyone on the same document at a time. Also, that can feel a little risky, right? You're like, oh, are people like looking at my answers? And hopefully we provide, right, folks their own slide, their own space to be reflective of themselves. I wasn't reading anything as it was happening. So I'm curious, what was that like? Did you, what were some areas of strength or skill that they feel after learning some about the quadrants of lead and follow and content and relationship? What were some areas that you reflected on and you're like, oh, I utilized that maybe pretty significantly? Just go ahead and come off mute for me. Let's hear from 2 or 3 people.
Could you ask the question one more time, please?
Yeah, what are some skills or areas of, like, what are some actionable behaviors that you find yourself utilizing a lot?
I think some action like behaviors that I find myself using a lot is connect. I feel like just I've always been the person to connect everyone just because I'm very outgoing, so I'm always talking to different groups and different people. So at the end of the day, like I'm the type of person that wants everyone to get along and just connect with one another. So I feel like I use that a lot, and that's just like an efficient way of me
That's
leading.
awesome. Thank you, V. Thanks very much. That's a great example. What are maybe two other folks? What are skills that you use a lot?
I think I'm very adaptable. I generally think that I'm like very easygoing and like go with the flow. So I feel like adaptability is something that I'm just like very comfortable with, just like moving with things wherever they go next, I guess.
Yeah, and that's super necessary, and especially a skill for right now, right? I think things and information we have is changing all the time, and to be able to adapt to new information that's being shared. Some people are finding that easier than others to do. And so to recognize like, okay, what are some coping skills around that? Or I've had some experience with that. Thanks, Carly, for that. One other person? Skills you use a lot? All right, we'll open it up to the next question. So you can still answer that one, skills you use a lot. But are there some skills that you'd like to work on a little bit? Maybe some areas that you're like, oh, I haven't really stretched my wings. Like, I want to be in education and I don't instruct all that much. And so do I need some experience in that area?
So I think I use the inspire and listen a lot. At least I try to. And at least I think I do. I don't know if I actually do or not, but that's just my perception. And I think those two are like really effective. They go together really well. But I think that working on those two, like listening just a little more than I talk for sure, and then convincing and empathizing. Even though I think I do those both a lot too, I think like the more I could improve on those, the more effective my inspiring and listening will be.
Thanks,
I
Adam.
think the whole circle kind of connects really nicely.
Good. Good. Others? Anyone share maybe an area that they want to identify and work on?
I think I'd like to work on the convince. I just feel like for being a marketing major, it's like really important to be able to have like that convincing aspect, or just like just in the fashion industry, it's really, you know, that's a really good quality to have. So I feel like I want to work on that.
That's great. Thanks, V. So I'm also curious, as we start to end and wrap up our time, what correlation? So we started with kind of the power to influence and how culture and personality might affect where you're most comfortable, or what behaviors you use most. I'm seeing a connect in from Carly that connecting is a big one and rely on friends and coworkers to reach out. I think that's awesome. And to recognize that there are so many factors that contribute to the why we might feel comfortable in different areas of the sphere that we do. And so for each of you, are there thoughts about your personality, or within the relationships that you thought about, like how culture shows up or your identities show up, that might lean you towards one area or another? Does that make sense? Love to hear from one or two folks we haven't heard from yet.
So for me personally, I would want to work on like listening. Like I find listening like sometimes a very hard skill, just because we tend to get caught up in our own experiences or stories when talking to others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good reminder to ourselves to make sure we listen to others to have a good conversation.
Yeah. Because it turns out when you know where they're coming from and you've listened to them fully, you're much more convincing or influencing, because you can speak from where they are, right? So that listening and empathizing first, and then kind of utilizing some of those different behaviors, and that's how they all impact. Jamie, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? Last one or so?
I'll share. I think that's a great question, Em. So I'm thinking a lot about, you said, I think if I heard correctly, like how does culture, identity, personality show up for you? So I'm thinking a lot about, I rated myself really highly in the listening category. I think in the video they talked about, if you're a listener, like you are the person who sits back and you nod. And in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I nod and I smile and I listen. I'm thinking a lot about my identity as a white woman. I'm thinking a lot about the connections to striving for perfection and not wanting to say the wrong thing, and how all of that links into, yeah, I think sometimes I'm a really good listener. And that doesn't mean I'm not focused on what other people are saying, but I'm also probably focused on what other people might think about what I say.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
You know, I'll go back to why I wanted to tackle this topic, and thinking about how culture comes into play and how we communicate. So I shared that, you know, both my partner and I are having conversations with our family members about how and why we feel the way we do about taking the precautions that we are. And to note the different actionable behaviors that she demonstrates with hers, being a Latinx family that has different communicative patterns, and how I communicate with mine, coming from a white culture with very different communicative patterns, and having really honest conversations together about how and why. She has aspects of her story, so I won't share them. But for me, I've been conditioned to approach, my family in a certain way, and she also has been conditioned to approach her family in a different way. So I think that all of these components and characteristics of who we are, our personality, our experiences, our behavior, our identities, our ability to influence within those relationships, they all matter. So we started this. Let me see if I can get back there. So we started this by saying our focus areas today were actions. How do we inspire or influence? And then what is leadership? And to really drive home that leadership is just actions, different actions that we influence others. Because as whomever said, if your actions inspire others to be more, do more, dream more, or become more, then you are demonstrating leadership. So this is my, Rachel laughed, this is my lack of area of releasing perfection that I could have uploaded a whole different one, but I was like, I can't today. So you'll get a PowerPoint that shows it in the right way. But I am really grateful for you all sharing with us. We're coming just about up on our time, so I'll have Rachel put in the attendance link to the chat bar. But this week, I want you to look around you and see the actions and behaviors that you see demonstrated, right? From leadership that's coming from the university or from communities that you are a part of. I want you to think about who is telling you what to do and how. How are they influencing you? What behaviors or characteristics are they displaying? Is it working? Is it not? And when and where do you hold influence, and how do you use it? Because we all will. We'll all shift and change with the consistencies in our relationships to be in different places and positions of power, of influence, of maybe authority, or maybe trust, or maybe respect. And think about how you want to demonstrate some of these. I want to thank you for being here. We'll stick around. We're going to end the recording now. Please fill out that attendance link. Share any questions that you have, and really grateful that you all joined us today. Thanks. If you want to come out, thanks, Linda. You can come off mute before you leave. It's always nice to hear you say bye.